It is 6 o'clock, right on the dot. Welcome, everybody who's joining us this evening. Happy New Year, actually, first and foremost. I am excited to really kick it off into the new year. For those of you in California watching this, we are just shy of, I believe, 60 days from Election Day, the primary, coming up on March 5th. So it is crunch time. If you want to, you can introduce yourself in the chat. I do believe you have to be a subscriber still in order to chat. Just a way to fend off any of the trolls that decide to pop in here and there. But thank you for joining us this evening. It is 6:01. I'm not going to wait for folks to continue hopping on. Thank you to those who are on time. If you are new here, this is for the California Working Families Party. If you're out of the state, you are more than welcome to stay and join. But this will be focusing a lot on things pertinent and pertaining to California, especially as we kind of roll into this election year. One thing I do want to make a note of first is that these are a couple of the community agreements. I always like to share these every evening whenever we have an event, especially a virtual event. It's hard sometimes to really know one another. So I think the first one is take space and make space. If you are someone who is shy in some of these spaces, I really do encourage you to chat. I mean, there's nothing, no dumb questions. There's nothing unrelated to any of this stuff. Even a simple hi on YouTube makes more than enough. I encourage you to, again, take space here. Inversely, if you're someone who often chats, not that I'm going to stop you from chatting whatsoever, but maybe make space if you see that there's other folks watching, but maybe haven't chimed in yet. What happens here stays here. What is learned here leaves here. Yes, we are online. Yes, I know everything that is said online stays online. But what I really want to emphasize is when folks talk, when folks communicate with one another, be kind. Folks are learning. This is a learning space. And this is where we want to get what we have learned and take it elsewhere with us. This is really important and it really helps distribute a lot of the information that I'll share. So again, please be kind to one another. That's first and foremost, and take what you've learned here elsewhere. The last piece, and this is super important, is speak from your own experience, please. Use I statements. Try to avoid blanket statements. No matter how much you firmly believe in them, speak using your own voice. It is super important when we have these conversations as folks come in with different viewpoints, really being able to say, hey, this is what I believe. I hear what you're saying, and so on and so forth. So I think those three are very important here. If there's any of the community agreements that folks feel like we should talk about or include, feel free to say them in the chat. It doesn't have to be perfectly written out. Otherwise, I always ask folks to agree to the community agreements, a thumbs up, or direct into an emote. Anything's great to just let me know that you are aware and have kind of heard these community agreements. I'm just going to assume that folks heard, are a little shy right now, so no worries on saying anything right now. First and foremost, let's talk about why we are here. Why WFP? Why the Working Families Party? To really go into that, I think that it is most important to kind of go over what our theory of change is. Our theory of change is what really drives us forward. And to use a word that we use often in the space, what our North Star is. So what our North Star is to build a multiracial, feminist, working people's political party of the American left that wins governing power to enact a structural reform agenda to save the planet and all the people on it. Throughout this evening, I'll kind of dive more into what each of these pieces actually look like in practice. But in terms of, here's a simple sentence that really encapsulates everything that we are working towards and who is along for this ride with us. If folks have questions about what any of this means, feel free to ask in the chat. One thing I do want two things I really want to point out. One being political party. I'll go into what a political party looks like in actuality versus what we are often hear when we think of political parties. And two, governing power. Speaking from my own experience, sometimes I hear folks in different circles talking about like how they're always against the governing power because power ultimately corrupts. That's a separate conversation for another time. But governing power is really being able to enact the changes on a policy level. One thing that I really want to stress and emphasize is that governing power and all of this work isn't the end-all be-all to make all the changes we need. I am well aware that there are different avenues and different ways to enact change, whether structural or otherwise. This is just one of the routes the WFP is taking to make these changes. Something I really want to stress for folks, because I know there's folks like, oh, what have you considered doing X, Y, and Z? Yes, and other orgs do that well, but there's no point in reinventing the wheel when we already have a lot of good orgs doing a lot of this important work. If folks don't have any questions about that, again, feel free to chime in the chat. You are more than welcome to. But without that, I will continue moving onward and talking about really what the main four struggles that we see as WFP that exist here in the United States. And I say United States, these are, again, the broad struggles that we see. In California, obviously, ours are going to be a little different based on how our history goes and all these things like that. So I think this is really important to kind of go over. I will put them all up at once so folks can read along the way. These are what we see as the main four, and so I'll read them out for folks. The authoritarian white nationalist takeover of the GOP, the Democratic Party controlled by wealthy and corporate forces, Democrats losing working class people of all races, and the two-party system limiting our room to maneuver. So that's a lot. I will kind of jump into what each of them actually means. Some of them are a bit self-explanatory, but going on from here, the authoritarian white nationalist takeover of the GOP. I mean, white nationalism and the GOP, without going into a large history lesson, are pretty close friends and have been for a long time. The overtness in which that they are taking over the GOP is the part that is coming of concern. It's no longer just the party of Donald Trump. It is becoming the party of white nationalism and authoritarians. And it clearly poses a clear and present danger to people and our communities. What authoritarian looks like, and you can feel free to chime in how it shows up here in California, if you're not in California, how else it kind of shows up in different places. But what we're seeing is the incitements of racial violence, citing, quote unquote, the whole wokeness stuff. If you ask someone to ever define what that means, they will not be able to. It's one of those boogeyman words that they like to throw around as a means to pin folks against each other. We're seeing this as the restricting what decisions we can make with our bodies. Roe v. Wade and all the attacks on abortion rights and access throughout the country. Again, this is a big piece of what they're doing. Rising theocracy, Christian nationalism, don't want to have to get into that, but that is a rising piece that we're seeing. Open tax on democracy, again, anything over the last couple, since 2016, we're seeing more blatant and brazen attacks against democracy. Thanks for joining us, Arjun. Thanks for introducing yourself, too. And then violence against bars hosting drag shows and libraries and any place that hosts drag shows. And as a way that they utilize their governing power when they have it, passing laws to erase an entire group of people. This manifests in a bunch of different ways, but we're seeing them weaponize and utilize any kind of legislation to go after anyone that frankly just doesn't look like them. So that's kind of the authoritarian white nationalist takeover of the GOP. Again, if there's other ways that you see this coming up in California, feel free to share this in the chat. Moving on to the corporate and wealthy control of the Democratic Party. There's two things that I really like to differentiate in terms of how we think of the Democratic Party. There is the social policy side of things of like, oh, the foundational theory of like supporting people's basic human rights. For Democrats, often, not every instance, we're seeing that, okay, for the most part, they do support basic human rights for folks. It's when we get into economic and structural issues that things start to fade away in terms of how often they stand on the right side of where the people are. They often normalize the status quo. We often see folks, regardless of their background, supporting the economic and tax system that's currently in place that heavily supports the wealthy, as those are folks that donate to their campaigns and that they're close with and they schmooze with. I don't think I have to really emphasize why too much this is a problem, because it's clear that when it comes down to who they truly support when they're in elected office, whether it's in Sacramento or DC or at City Hall, we know who really has their ear. And it is definitely not the people out here that are actually voting them into office. Moving from there, we have the two-party system, which limits our room to maneuver. In California, we are in a special spot, I would say, where it allows us to not really have to compete too hard against the Republicans. Republicans are a larger threat as a party in the Central Valley and some parts of Southern California, like Orange County. Conservatism obviously is a different piece to that. There are conservatives within the Democratic Party. That's its own separate issue. But what really comes into this is the inability to focus on like how we market ourselves as a party. It limits our ability to maneuver because folks think of a third party as a spoiler. A spoiler being someone who takes the votes away from typically the Democratic or progressive liberal candidate, and then allowing a conservative or Republican to win in those races. So that's one of those things that we see as folks, when they think of a third party, really seeing as, oh, this limits our ability to maneuver. It also then really emphasizes on swing voters who, if you're familiar with politics, familiar with elections, are typically, not always, older, whiter, and more affluent. So you then focus on a subset of the folks that will often vote, but then you don't get a full reflection of folks within your community. So you can see how all these different pieces really prevent folks from being able to get their voices heard when folks are running in elections or not. If folks have, again, questions about this stuff, or if I'm talking too fast, feel free to let me know. I talk about this stuff because I know it like the back of my hand, but if folks need me to slow down, more than happy to. So again, these are the main four. I do want to emphasize that Democrats losing working class people of all races. We're seeing this a lot in California for sure. Even though we are a very diverse state, we are seeing Democrats losing working class people across the state, regardless of ethnicity. So this is, again, one of those things where as the Democratic Party gets more controlled by wealthy and corporate forces, they lose folks as they become out of touch with the everyday working class person. So we see those two kind of go hand in hand, which is why I didn't kind of elaborate on that one too much more, as it's a little self-explanatory. How do we see this happen? Again, we're seeing it with all the changes in who really makes up the Democratic Party and how they really convey their policies to folks out in the communities. Again, this is what folks typically think of political parties. However, I would like to provide a different understanding a bit, and that is, this is what we want to kind of define as a political party. These four things here. So, in no particular order, the first being people organizing together. Second part, to do elections. 3, around a platform. 4, governed by a clear ideology. So a political party is all four of these. It's not just these four. Obviously, there's a lot of different pieces to this. But in order to actually make the change that we want to make, based, again, on the North Star I mentioned earlier, these are all the pieces to allow us to do it. So again, we're organizing around elections specifically. So that's something that I really want to highlight and emphasize here. Around a platform, and again, I'll kind of touch about what it is that we support beyond just the North Star, and then governed by a clear ideology. If folks have questions, again, feel free to let me know. This is just how we define a political party. So when folks say, oh, are you on the ballot line here in California? Not here in California, and I will say not yet. with little asterisks. Don't quote me on that. But in other states like New York, we have a ballot line. So New York WFP is its own ballot line there. They have a different way in which that they organize and have elections, so they have some more leniency and can avoid the spoiler issue. But in California, this is how we define WFP as a political party. Moving on from there, I really just want to emphasize this is what we believe. If you have ever heard our executive director, Maurice Mitchell, speak before, you will know that I am not doing it justice, especially him justice, in saying this, as he conveys things in a much more eloquent way than I ever could. But I will read it out here just so you can hear it as well. In order to build the world we need, we have to dismantle racism and sexism. We need to build an economy that puts people and the planet ahead of profit. To accomplish any of this, we need a political revolution that will transform our government by taking power from the billionaires and warmongers and putting it in the hands of the majority of Americans. Again, this is just a more eloquent way, a nicer way of restating our North Star. Everything here is stuff that we want to focus on as we really try to make changes throughout the state and then throughout and nationally as well. But bringing it down to what it is like in California. So this is what California looks like. The left picture here of the 2020 general election is what folks often think of when they think of California, especially on an election side of things. You get heavily blue with areas and pockets of red. Regardless if it's a Biden or a Trump up on for the elections, this is generally what people think. Yes, however, that same year, that same election, the map looks a lot different when we have a different piece of legislation up on the ballot. So Prop 15 was a rent control ballot. I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but this really would have addressed a lot of issues with Prop 13 that we had, that have here in California. The vote doesn't look the exact same as it does for the 2020 general election. We see a very stark difference in terms of how much areas are blue, blue being areas that supported Prop 15, and then the red being areas that voted against this. So there's a big difference in terms of what people think of, like, okay, this is the presidential level of things, but when you get down on the smaller scale of stuff statewide or stuff locally, we're seeing a shift in things of like, okay, this may not convey truly what folks actually vote, or the folks that did vote, how their policies actually align with folks across the state. I don't want to get into the specifics of Prop 15. It's its own chaos, especially with Prop 13, all conversations around that. But this is just kind of the context of California that I wanted to bring up before getting into like how we are trying to tackle all these different issues. So as California WFP, we are comprised of 3 pillars. So we're not just like, okay, we're a political party, ta-da, it's staff running everything. We actually don't even get to vote on the endorsements and stuff. I'm a statewide organizer. I don't get to play a part in this stuff. I can help organize steering committee, but these are the folks that actually vote on the decisions that we have across the state. So the statewide governing body is made up of these 3 pillars: statewide labor unions, statewide community groups or C4s, and then regional charters, which are made up of, as you guessed it, the regional charters. We have 7 here in California. We are a massive state, and so rather than governing everything on a statewide level, we felt that it would make more sense to have the 7 regional charters govern their areas, and the statewide governing body deal with anything that had to do with statewide. So these are the 7 charters. Again, the Bay Area, Central Coast, Central Valley, LA County, OC, Inland Empire, San Diego. If you have any questions about where you fall into any of this, because sometimes different areas are included in different places, feel free to let me know. I can clarify, and I will also direct you to who our respective organizer is for that place. Whether it's your city, your county, whatever you want to ask, feel free to ask. And then underneath this, yes, so out of Sacramento. Sacramento is included in the Central Valley. That's what we decided it best fit under. The areas up north, right now, it's a very sparsely populated areas. We do like to include folks north of SAC in any of our statewide organizing works, but right now it's hard to find areas and pockets where we can strongly organize around. And I'll kind of get into the details of like specific races and what we're prioritizing. But at the end of it, we do want to be able to expand to every corner and nook and cranny of California. So thanks for asking that, Tony. And for the regional charters, they are made up of the same 3 pillars, except the last pillar, instead of being the regional charters, are made up of individual members. And I will clarify this to say this is the individual member reps who are representative of any dues-paying members here in California. So if you are a dues-paying member here in California, regardless of where you are, you should have a member rep for your specific area. If you don't know who your member rep is, again, feel free to reach out to me, ask me anytime in the chat at any point, and I can direct you to who, one, your organizer is, and then 2, to the member rep as well. And they're the person who gets to vote on local endorsements, whether it's for candidates or any other kind of policy issues, ballot initiatives, whatever comes up. And again, labor unions on a local level, and then community C4s as well. I always like to share, without getting into too much detail, who all of these orgs are. So we have the statewide organizations listed here underneath, statewide organizations, and then also the regional and local organizations per area. You can see all of them listed here. I hope, fingers crossed, I didn't miss any this time. I updated this just earlier today because Project Superbloom actually just recently joined us on the statewide level last month, I believe. So they are one of the latest additions to California Working Families Party. We are also always looking for more folks who want to join either on the statewide organizing level or regional and local. So if you know of C4s, labor unions that you're affiliated with, feel free to reach out to them and ask them about WFP if they're familiar with it, if they're interested in joining the stuff. Obviously, us as staff can help facilitate those conversations. Don't expect everything to fall on you just because you're interested and excited about doing that. We are, of course, happy to help and facilitate those things as they come up. But as always, we really hope that more folks join on the individual or the organization side so that we can grow our capacity throughout the state. So going into where we are now, we are already 8 days into 2024, and this is kind of where the strategic direction goes. Thanks for joining us, Landon. Of course, thank you for joining. These are the 2024 strategic directions. These are 3 that we came up with. This is not everything along that we're going to be focusing on. I could talk for hours and hours about what we want to do, but these are kind of the main 3. So the first being expand the state legislative squad in 4 to 5 key races. Upgrade folks to liberal Dems in 2 to 3 more. 3 in the Senate, 2 in the Assembly. This may sound confusing right now. I'll explain it in the next couple of slides, what that actually looks like and means. Note underneath here, LA, Inland Empire, the Bay have big potential races that we can use to kind of upgrade folks. And I say upgrade as in like they're currently not as progressive, and we can upgrade that seat to someone who is progressive. The second piece is focus on the pipeline development in local races. So Board of Supervisor races, municipal races, school board, water district, whatever smaller than state ledge district that may come up. We really want to invest in folks and support folks as they run for whatever office they choose to run for. Granted, of course, that they are progressive and meet kind of the WFP criteria for us to support them. This, again, is not too big in the primary. Very few areas have some county races. This is more for some of the smaller stuff that will come up in November. So a lot of folks haven't announced yet they're going to be running. This really pertains to folks that will kick their stuff off after the primary. And then the third piece is work with the federal team. Again, we're the California team. Federal team is focused on taking back 2 to 4 congressional swing seats and expand progressives in Congress. It'd be nice if we can get folks on in the squad from California and expand that number. But that's just one of the things that we are also focusing on. This really pays more attention to the Central Valley and some parts of Southern California. This also kind of taps into the U.S. Senate race as a big organizing potential. As California WFP, we did endorse Barbara Lee for U.S. Senate, so that is something that we are thinking about. But we're also mindful that the House needs to be really focused on it too, to prevent the Republicans from holding on to that there. So another thing I actually want to mention too is if you know candidates that maybe I haven't mentioned, folks that are running for office on whatever level, make sure you check in with whoever your organizer is, see if that person submitted an application, if they got a screening or if they didn't, or some of the reasons. There's a bunch of reasons why things could or could not have happened. So I would make sure to check in with whoever your organizer is there. Or if you have questions about why someone wasn't endorsed too, if I can, I'll try to share those things as well. But going on to really what we're focusing on as California WFP in the next couple of cycles. Yes, one of them is EJ Hinojosa in the Central Valley. He's running for supervisor, but yes, we did endorse EJ. This is kind of how we are looking at how things are in the state assembly. So as if you don't know, I will explain it really quickly. We have a 2 bicameral legislature. We have an assembly, which is basically our equivalent of Congress, and we have a state senate. So there's 2 sides. Assembly, again, there's smaller districts, more of them. Senate, larger areas, less of them. This is how we see the breakdown of how it's really built up right now. Thank you for joining us, Grace. I'm glad it's really informative. This, I know, looks like a lot. You don't have to memorize this all. This will be up on YouTube later, so you can peek back at it at any point. But the big 2 things I want to point out, at the top, you have systemic as folks who see that things need to be systemically changed. In the middle, you got neoliberal. If you need a definition of what that means, feel free to ask. And then you got reactionary on, notably, the far right. So you see where different folks land as we kind of look as where things are. So Governor Gavin Newsom, dead centered up there at neoliberal. Right below him is the newest Speaker of the Assembly, Robert Rivas. On the liberal, neoliberal scale of things, that's kind of where he lands. Definitely slightly more to the left than the previous Speaker of the Assembly. But really what I want to focus on is these list of 24 progressives. And progressive here is a very broad definition. This isn't just folks that are WFP endorsed. The folks that are WFP endorsed are the ones in purple. These are all folks that we have screened, that have submitted applications, and that we decided, hey, yeah, this person is a fantastic person that can represent working families on the state assembly. Green are open seats in this coming 2024 election, so we have a bunch of folks running for these seats. I'll talk about them more later. And then the black in the black font is folks who are, again, running for re-election, but they just kind of fit into that broad progressive bucket. So there are 80 seats in the assembly. 41 votes are needed for a majority. 53 votes are needed for the 2/3 supermajority. California special, I say special sarcastically, in that we need 2/3 to pass anything that has to do with taxes and stuff, and then it has to go to voters and a whole mess of things like that. Not super great in actually passing strong progressive legislation that has to deal with economic issues, but the bare minimum that we need is 41 folks for a majority. Right now, even if we include the 10 liberal folks, that puts us at 34. 7 shy of the 41 needed for a majority. That means we need to flip some of the corporate Dems and make sure we maintain the folks that are progressive and liberal. Right now, there are 18 Republicans in the Assembly, 2 open for 2024. Obviously, those fights are in areas that lean more conservative, so those are harder fights to battle. But the 28 corporate Dem seats, 4 are open in 24. Open being that folks are not running for re-election. Assembly seats are up every 2 years. This just means 4 are open in this coming year, so it's an uptick of 4 that we can gain from that chunk and bring it over to our side in terms of votes that we need to pass legislation that we want. If any of this is confusing, feel free to let me know. I will jump into the Senate side of things. It's pretty much the same layout, except things don't look as good for progressives. There is a smaller group of us, I would say. We're sitting at 14, 10 progressives, and then 4 liberal Dems, with 21 votes needed for a majority. This is where we get into being strategic about which seats that we want to go after. Because one thing that I'll talk about in the state legislature, and that has actually changed this time, thankfully, is committee chairs are folks that are appointed by the speaker or the speaker pro tem in the Senate, who then get to decide what legislation is heard in their committee. So if someone has a housing committee and they are the chair of the housing committee, they got to decide what bills got heard. So if there's a super progressive bill that got heard, they would opt to not have that heard if they just didn't like to have it heard. Now things have changed in the Assembly where every bill needs to get heard, which is a great thing because I'll talk about it later, but Alex Lee's wealth tax will get a hearing on this coming Wednesday, actually, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. But committee chairs are important because they get to decide which legislation gets heard. And again, this 10 progressives is a very broad progressive definition. The ones in purple are purplish color are the folks that are WFP endorsed, and the green is the one that is going to be an open seat this coming March, actually, for the primary, and then into the general election. But as you can see, there's a lot more work that needs to be done on the Senate side of things. A lot more help needs to be done to defend our progressives, and then also make sure to flip corporate Dem seats as we build out our squad. I've mentioned squad a couple times now. What that means and what that looks like is these individuals here. So folks know of the squad as the folks in Congress. We, as WFP California, have our own California squad. This does not include one of our latest endorsements for Alex Mojica in Orange County, who we recently just endorsed, so this graphic doesn't include him. But these are the folks that we've endorsed for the primary in March 2024. You can see all their names here. A lot of them, again, progressive champions. The folks that are not included on this graphic are folks that are not up for re-election in this coming year. So that is Senator Aisha Wahab, Senator Lola Smallwood-Cuevas, and then Senator Carolyn Menjivar. Those are folks that we endorsed in 2022 that have a couple more years until they're up for re-election. So this are our squad members. You may have seen us post about them or at one of our member meetings where we've interviewed them and talked with them. They are fantastic people. I would really encourage you to get to know if any of them are in your area so you can support them. On their races, again, we are shy of 60 days from the election, so things are really heating up and they need any extra support that they can get. Really jumping in now to what it is that we focus on as California WFP. I talked a bit about what our targets are. I talked a bit about what we really are focusing on in terms of priorities, but that's not all of what we do. So one of the things that we really like to focus on are the campaign camps. These are sometimes in person, sometimes virtual events where we train folks up on how to run campaigns. So anything from how to find your win number, your universe size, anything that you can use to run, that you need to run for office. So social media stuff, digital design things, Canva training, all of these things are super useful for folks. I myself have worked on a bunch of campaigns. All of our staff has worked on campaigns. That information is great for me to utilize, but I would much rather folks have it and they use it out in the field. There's a lot of consultant-heavy folks that really rely on consultants. Consultants have their benefits for certain kind of knowledge, but when it comes to field and running progressive campaigns, that's where I've noticed that they tend to falter a bit. So again, these campaign camps are completely free. We like to host these. They're coming up back in spring of 2024, so March into April and May. We are hoping to do a lot more in-person campaign camps. If you want or think there's an interest in doing a campaign camp in your area, feel free to chime in into the chat like, hey, I think one would be great in this region or this city. If we have the capacity and the scheduling works out, we would love to do that. The other things that we do is we have the online virtual ones where we just have, okay, there's folks, a lot of folks spread out across the state. This is something that we can do for folks if they want to learn about campaign fundraising, or if they want to know how to do, like, run an actual phone bank and door knocking program. From start to finish, recruiting volunteers, training them up. These are things that are completely free and that you kind of need to know along the way. So again, all of this is free. I encourage folks to attend if you haven't attended any before, or if you think one would be great in your area, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the other organizers that I'll share their contacts for. Another thing that we're seeing in California, election time isn't just now around the typical elections. We are fighting back against recalls. Across the state, we're seeing them weaponized, not just by Republicans, but by conservative forces and corporate forces across the state. We can go into the whole attempted recall of the governor. I myself worked on the defense of Chase Boudin in San Francisco as he was the district attorney. Unfortunately, we did not win that one, but we did beat back the recall of Jesse Lopez in the city of Santa Ana. Jesse was actually one of our first endorsed candidates in California WFP back in 2020. So she had to fight back a recall put on by the Police Officers Association because they could not buy her vote, and wealthy corporate developers and landlords, as she was very strongly in favor of rent control within the city of Santa Ana. We were very lucky to beat back this special election. They, as Tony mentioned exactly, they rely on low voter turnout in these recall elections. In this specific election of Jesse Lopez in Santa Ana, this was the only election on that ballot. There was nothing else. There was no presidential stuff. There was no other propositions. It was just focused on this. So anything that we had to do for turnout came from the campaign and came from us helping out in the field. So I and the rest of the organizers went down to Orange County in the final week, helped them out. Laura Nguyen, who is our organizer in Orange County, did a fantastic job organizing a lot of the events, phone banks, virtual things, and we were able to beat that back. But we're seeing that folks continue to use this as a playbook to recall anyone that they really just don't like without seeing any of the work that they're actually doing. So they're utilizing this any way they can as a way to undermine, especially progressive folks that get into office. Not only do we defend folks, but we also like to uplift the folks while they're in office. We host town halls with individuals and electeds across the state. Two of them that we had last year, for example, one was with Fu Zhang in Merced. Another was with Lisette Espinosa Garnica in Redwood City. She is the vice mayor. So we like to amplify the work that our electeds are doing. So it's not just like, hey, this person's election's over. Cool. We'll see you in 2 years. We'll see you in 4 years. We really want to uplift anything that our folks have done. So we like to uplift folks on whatever issues that they have. And at the same time, not just around elections or candidates or elected officials, we like to have socials. I believe, I don't remember where the bottom one was. I think it was San Diego or Inland Empire, but the other one was in Long Beach. We like to have socials. We're going to do a lot more in this coming year, where we just hang out, talk, chat, eat food. I, as an organizer, I will always pay for folks' food. So if you are at any of my events as a social, just know that I will be paying for your food. That's an incentive to show up and come in person to these things. We like to host these at any point throughout the year. We will likely be doing more of them after the primary because a lot of our focus will be focused on supporting the elections, but keep an eye out for any in your area. We also, as I kind of mentioned a bit earlier, like to do some congressional actions. This primarily focused in stuff in the Central Valley. That other one, the local groups urge Reps Valadeo and Speaker McCarthy. That one definitely has aged fantastically with McCarthy gone. So we like to hold them accountable, regardless of if they're Republican or not. We like to do actions at their offices often, or anything that they're doing. One of them was at a fundraiser, the one with Valadeo and McCarthy, and another one was at the office of Congressman Valadeo in the Central Valley. So these we have sprinkled out throughout the year. Personally, if you like to be a rabble-rouser and show up and make some noise against some of these folks, I would definitely keep an eye out for any of these congressional actions or any other actions that we do related to this. One of the things I do want to mention, and I kind of touched upon it earlier, is the wealth tax, actually, that is being heard, finally, in the Assembly for its first committee hearing on Wednesday, the 10th. I, in the chat, dropped a Action Network petition form putting on by CFT, California Federation of Teachers, who are the co-authors of the legislation with Assemblymember Alex Lee. I believe it's just a petition, so you can just sign your name, share it with folks, share it on socials. It is for AB 259. This is a great way to kind of just bug your legislator, bug any of the folks in the committee to really vote yes on this legislation. We just heard about this a couple days ago because session just kicked back into session last Wednesday, I believe. So if you get the chance, feel free to just sign on to that Action Network forum or share it with anyone you know. Super important that we get this legislation passed. We do want to focus on anything that we can to make the super rich and rich pay their fair share. This is, I believe I still have the recording somewhere of when we had the Assembly member. Thank you, Landon, for signing already. That's fantastic. We had the Assembly member and then Tristan Brown from CFT talk about what this wealth tax really looks like and like how it can get implemented. So I think that was a really good thing. If you are interested in that, I will probably be able to share it with folks. I believe it is a Zoom recording. I might just upload it to YouTube, actually, so folks can look back on it. Another thing I want to share is this is one of the big things that we were focusing on last year. Not that we're not focusing on it now, but the ceasefire. So we were focusing on the ceasefire, calling legislators in Congress to sign on to the ceasefire put on by Rashida Tlaib and Congresswoman Cori Bush. We were also talking about the no funding. There was a funding legislation that was going to the Senate that would give, don't quote me, $14 billion, I believe, in aid to Israel, unconditional aid, so that could be used on weapons or anything that they can use to continue their destruction of Gaza and the West Bank. We would do these weekly on Wednesdays. I don't know when the upcoming one is, but you can check out our Mobilize to see if it's listed there. I actually want to see if this works. I don't know if it'll work or not. Sometimes it's finicky. Woohoo, it worked. So you can do exclamation mark events, and it'll give you the link to our Mobilize, where you can see anything that we have coming up. Great place to see anything that we have, whether it's an event like this, whether it's a social, whether it's congressional action. All of that stuff can be found there. And I do want to take time to introduce who our team is. I don't know if any of them are watching right now, but if you are, you can introduce yourself in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just introduce you here. Our statewide director is Jane Kim, former supervisor in San Francisco. Thank you, Tony, for signing as well. Jane Kim was also the political director and my boss's boss when I was working on the Bernie 2020 campaign. Jorge Contreras is longtime WFP, or I guess that's the best way to say it. He helped with Texas WFP. Now he is our senior campaign manager here in California. He is based here in the Bay Area as well. We have Adam Gold, who is the senior federal affairs strategist. He focuses a lot on the stuff that we have going on for congressional actions and anything that pertains to any of the federal work that we do. And then us as organizers. There are 5 of us right now. Actually, there are 6, but I'll save that for later. These 5 are myself, who is the statewide organizer. Again, my email is there. If you signed up for this event on Mobilized, you can also see my email there. It's just Rodriguez-Swanson@workingfamilies.org. I know it is long. Sorry, I apologize for that. Alicia Crater is our social media manager and our organizer for the Bay Area. If you see anything on our social media that looks beautiful, looks fantastic, is aesthetically pleasing, know that is Alicia 100%. We have Hannah Kessel, who is our Southern California organizer based in LA. Lauren Nguyen, who is a Southern California organizer for the Orange County, Inland Empire, and San Diego. And then Neil Sanapa, who is the senior organizer for the Central Coast and the Valley. Again, our emails are here. Reach out to us at any time. If you have questions about which region you specifically fall into, you can be sure to just reach out to me or any of them if you think you are in their area. One thing I did want to share, but I didn't add here because I did not have his headshot and everything ready yet, is that we do have a new organizer in the Bay Area. You guys are the first publicly, I think, that we are sharing this with, faster than our social media. Thank you, Arjun, for signing as well. We haven't shared it on social media yet. I think we're sharing it later this week, but Mayor of South San Francisco, James Coleman, the one and only, is now one of our organizers in the Bay Area as well. So James Coleman, Mayor of South San Francisco, is one of our fellow organizers here for the California Working Families Parties. You heard it here first if you did not know already. You can say that you were one of the first people to hear about this before it was posted on social media. So you can thank me for that. I will get him on one of these events at some point to introduce himself. He is great, fantastic. He is one of the youngest LGBTQ plus mayors in California, if not the youngest, if not nationwide, to be mayor of a city. So it is fantastic that he is with us. Very grateful to have him on board. Thank you for signing, everybody. I'm glad everyone has found this informative and super useful. One thing I will share at the very end, like I always do, is membership. If you want to become a member of California WFP, the dues paying member, you can pay any amount. Anything goes. That's a recurring donation of monthly amounts. If you can only do $1, then $1 makes sense. If you can't do $1, that's completely fine. Pay whenever you need to. All of our money and everything that you help contribute to us goes directly to our electoral work, paying for our salaries and stuff, but mostly to the electoral work because that's exactly where we need to focus the most on. Supporting our squad members, supporting anyone who's running for office. All of these are easy ways to get involved. Again, not the only ways to get involved. So if you can't become a dues paying members, donation tripling. Yes, go Landon. All of this makes a big difference in helping out with us and getting any of the stuff that we talked about passed. So you should have been able to see the link I dropped in the chat. If you don't see it, do !member in the chat and the link should be there. It's an Act Blue page. We ended 10 minutes early. Thank you, folks. If you have questions, I will stay on. I will also put this back on so you can see the emails and what is contact information. if you have any questions pertaining to anything I talked about here, anything else unrelated to this, feel free to ask at any point. Arjun with a significant donation. The minimum is just $1 a month. That's the minimum. If you are unemployed and can't do it right now, Tony, do not worry. The default is 10, I believe, on the Act Blue. The default is 10. We encourage folks to do 10 if they're able, but if folks are not able right now, I completely understand. $1 a month, you are becoming a member. So thank you everybody who has become a member. North County, San Diego. Yeah, so that will be Laura. You can see her email up there. I will also put it in the chat. Laura will be a contact for North County, San Diego. The other thing I do want to mention too is that we are going to start up a California WFP podcast because there's a lot of information that I want to share with folks, and I don't want to just have to do it like twice a month with this and some of the other member meetings. So we are going to be doing that more often. If you have ideas for us, what we can cover, feel free to let me know. The other thing I do want to share is our Discord. If you are not yet already on it, hop onto our Discord. This is a place where we can just chat. It's, if you know what Slack is, it's basically the cooler version of Slack. Thank you, Tony. Thank you. No rush again to up it at any point, but thank you again for joining us and doing it for now. The Discord's a great place to offer suggestions on stuff, ask questions to myself or any of the other organizers. As I mentioned with the podcast, if you have ideas on it, feel free to message me on like who you'd want to see on a podcast, ask questions to. And again, in space like this, I want to do live podcasts where folks can ask questions to whoever our guest speaker is. So if you know someone like, hey, you should get such and such person on here, we will do it. We recorded our first one that is up on YouTube right now, actually, with Neil Sanapa. We're just talking about kind of issues like this and how legislation dies in the Assembly and Senate. So, I mean, it's great when we have legislation that does pass, but being progressives, we are still in the minority, so we have to fight an uphill battle to get legislation passed through the mods and the corporate back Dems. And we went into how legislation actually dies and how it gets passed and how it gets watered down for folks who are not familiar with the cycle and the life of a bill. So you can check that out on our YouTube. I believe it's just in our videos, and subtitles are up. All that's good to go. Again, feel free to share that with folks if you're interested. It's a good kind of introduction to WFP. Same with this video. This will be live and up on YouTube afterwards once this is wrapped up. Any other questions folks have, or any other comments people want to share? Anything that folks want me to elaborate on for next time? I like to do these the first Monday of every month, so we will have one next February on, I don't know, I don't have my calendar in front of me, but whatever the first Monday is for February, we will have that. So if you know folks who are interested in WFP, want to learn more about us, send them the link to that once it's up on Mobilize, and they can be onboarded from there. Again, thank you everybody who joined us. Thank you for everyone who chimed in the chat. I loved seeing folks finding this interesting and finding this useful. I am always here to be of use. Whatever you think is useful, I am always here to help. I will give another minute for folks to share any final thoughts if they want, any final questions. Otherwise, we can have a good night. You get another 6 minutes back. But again, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Hope you found it super useful, super informative. Reach out to us at any time. Thank you, Arjun. Thank you, Tony. I want to make sure I thanked everybody who... Landon, Arjun, Christian, Tony. Yes, thank you, everybody. Without further ado, I give you the rest of your evening back. Hope everyone had a fantastic New Year. I will see you at hopefully an upcoming event, whether virtually or online. Take care, everybody.